Hi guys, it's Matt here from Maxon UK, and in this video we are going to be taking a look at how to get yourself started with sculpting in BodyPaint 3D. So as you can see, I've got here's one I prepared earlier, as it were, a little sculpt that I'd been working on using one of the base meshes that you can find within the BodyPaint 3D content browser, and that's what we're going to be starting with today. We're not going to do an entire tutorial on how to work into this, because this took me sort of like between 6 and 12-ish hours to sort of experiment, play, work and rework with some of the layering and things like that. So I'm just going to give you a sort of a starting point to see where to get yourself going with it and how to use some of the tools that can help you. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is File and New and change my layout to the Sculpt layout. There we go. So that this is going to help me quite a bit because it's got access to lots of the tools that I'm going to be using. And then if I go to my content browser, I'm going to do a search for, let's see, Raptor, I think. There we go, Velociraptor base. And double click, there we go. And here we have the Velociraptor. So this is what I started with. Okay, this is what I was using to get all of the layers and then all of the detail within. You can see that the mesh itself is quite blocky, so if I just go to, there you go, that is all that this mesh actually starts with. It's not very high poly at all, and the mesh detail that we create is all done through the subdivisions, which is actually, you know, really nice and a really strong part of BodyPaint 3D. Okay, so let's get going then. I'm going to turn those back off so I'm just working within this. So one of the things that we've got our objects, our layout changes quite a bit. So we've got our main object and we've got a whole load of sub-objects as well that we could be looking at. The one I'm only really going to focus on is the body in this case, because this is the one that we're going to be producing the most detail on. You've got your take system and content browser and structure as normal, and then down the bottom you have your attributes, layers, materials and coordinates. But this is probably the most useful one, is the sculpting layer. So to get cracking then, what we need to do is, I found press subdivide. And that gives us a base object. That is what we will be working on. And if I just have a look at my object there, you can see that we now have this sculpt tag that works its way onto this as a base mesh. So that is what they refer to as layer 0. Okay, this is its base mesh. And then I'm going to subdivide a few more times because I'm aware that I'm not going to get the detail that I want out of some of the lower levels. And you can see that it starts to look a bit smoother, and you can work your way through the levels just by clicking and dragging, and it will have to update a little bit, and the more that you have, the slower it will be to update. And then if so you can see that it's just taking its time. There we go, back to 1, up to 2. And it's subdivided. So there are now only 52,000 polygons in that, which really isn't that much at the moment. So I'm just going to hit subdivide a few more times. So I get myself, oh, what have I got? 842,000. Okay, I think my other one I was using sort of level 5, so I'm going to subdivide one more time. Now it does mean that I'm going to be working with 3.37 million polygons. Okay, so we shall see how my little machine deals with that. And if I just have a little spin around, there we go, still no problem in being able to sort of cope with that amount of polygons at the moment, but we haven't actually tried to add in any of the detail yet. So what I would then do, I'm going to lock that to stop myself from being able to do anything to the base object, but I will create myself a new layer. And this is how I work. I will work in various different layers and then add in and try it and experiment with it so that you can fully sort of understand how to layer stuff in sculpting. And then if you don't like something on that layer, then you can hide that layer, or you can choose the strength that that layer has. And that's really useful. If you add in too much stuff that's a little bit too detailed, then you can lower this down so that it isn't quite so bad or quite so impactful on the final model. Also, if you do have a graphics tablet, this will make your life so much easier. Sculpting with a mouse is quite tricky. So to start with, what I'll do on this layer, I'm going to call it sort of muscle, really. And you can see that actually this model's got quite good form, as it were, already, but I'm going to add in a little bit more with this sort of level. So just simply using the pull object, you can see that it caches down the bottom left hand corner, and we get this ability of adding in detail of using this brush, and it's going to work on this muscle side. Now your settings here all sort of relate to, you know, size, that's your brush size, and then you've got pressure, that's how much it will kind of apply to, depending on, I mean, you can also tie it to the graphics tablet pen pressure as well. And then you've got build up, and this is how much it will sort of put together on each layer each time you sort of go over it. You can also work with symmetry as well, so using the local axis, if I press that, you can see I've got a second dot either side, which means whatever I do to one side I can, you know, do to the other. So if I just want to slowly build up that muscle over there and then have a look the other side, you can see that it's done the same thing. But what it means is, because it's reflecting on that axis, it means that I can do it to this side and it will work on that one, and then I can swap and it will continue to work its way around, which is just a really useful tool. Oh, we're beach balling. There we go. So what I'm going to do really quickly is I'm just going to add in some extra muscle detail, I think. So just like increase the size of the legs, but I don't really want what I've done before. So with the muscle, I can right click and you can clear the layer, and that will remove the sculpting that I have done to that already, because I didn't really want the stuff that I'd done at the top. I was just showing you what it would do. Square brackets will allow you to change the size of the brush as well. So if I just add in some detail there, just to sort of increase the thickness of his legs, really, just to want to overemphasize some of that muscle, and little bits on the arm, okay, maybe a bit around the shoulder. This is quite a stocky velociraptor, isn't it, really? So there we go, just want to add that out. Now if you are wanting to do this properly, to get real muscle structure, then I can't recommend enough actually looking at some proper reference material and some animals and figuring out how it's going to work its way to look like a proper muscled animal. At the moment, I admit I am doing it by visuals only, but if you are trying to get a more realistic result for you know, structure and things like that, then do look at some reference material. Okay, it's one of the biggest things in certainly art and design and animation, that you need reference material to be able to help you. Okay, you might not be able to go out and find, you know, a useful specimen of a velociraptor, but nonetheless you will be able to find creatures that walk like this, that you can, oh dear, that you can use to help you and produce more realistic looking studies. So this is what I would sort of like have as a base mesh, a base model, and then I'll have this layer to just sort of add in some muscles to it. So it just gets you some form. I keep pressing the wrong button. Because the cool thing is actually with the sculpting button is that if you paint, you can see that it bulbuses out. If you hold down Command or Control, it will invert the function so that you can indent. That's a bit much. The other one I'm going to use is smoothing, but you need to make sure that you link the symmetry both when you swap the tool, because the symmetry is only going to be related to the tool that you are on. So you want to make sure that in order to get both sides, that you are adding in the symmetry each time. So I'm just going to smooth that down, and what I might do is just pull that back out a little bit so that it isn't quite so formed. Okay, cool. Now this gives us quite a nice amount of detail, and what I'll do once I'm happy with my form in that sort of way, I will lock my layer so I can't accidentally do something to it, and then I will create myself a new layer. And this one, what I might do is call skin, okay, because that's what I'm going to be working on now. I want to start adding in some of the skin detail perhaps to my creature here. So looking at the head, what I'm going to do is going to use my pull tool there, and I'm going to load a brush preset. Now there are loads of different things in here, which is really nice, and you can see that you've got all sorts of stuff from being able to sculpt on rivets, you know, if you're doing body armor or something like that, to technical stuff which is quite cool, tree bark, zips, that's really cool. So you could, if I really wanted to, I could paint on an absolutely massive large zip down him and he could look like he's a suit, but I'll pass for that one for the moment. So what I really want is that there is a skin in here, and there's a few different types of skin as well. There are lizardy skin, there are scales as well, which would be quite cool. But what I really want is something like that. Okay, now it's quite a big brush because I want quite big skin for the moment. So, but I might just lower that down a bit. So making sure that I'm on that one there, I will just start to paint in, and there we go. You can see that that starts to come into play, and it means that I can build stuff up. So if I just stroke this down, it will start to build up what looks like skin on his, you know, body as well. And because we're using symmetry, if I just nip round to the other side, okay, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to turn symmetry on. But this gives me a wonderful opportunity to show you the other tool that I use for when I do this. We have a Sculpt Symmetry button. Okay, so if you click Sculpt Symmetry, you can choose to mirror your layer. Now, depending on the access that you've got, you can, you choose your variety of, whichever option will suit you best. You can mirror the whole object or you can mirror the layer. So with my skin object selected, and I shall click Mirror Layer. Okay, and it's just initializing down the bottom left hand corner, as you can see. Okay, and there we go. It is working its way through, and when it is finished calculating, it should have that mesh on both sides. There you go. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to add in my symmetry back on there, and I'm going to keep layering this up. And it's just really nice because you can see that it starts to add in, it already brings this creature to life without having to do too much already to it. Now, sometimes I will, I'll go over the same bit a couple of times and I'll try and really build that up. You can change some of your settings as well. So if you wanted to increase your pressure and increase your build up, you'd be able to see the difference that makes. So it's making much more of an impression much sooner than it kind of did before. And this just kind of gives you a little bit of a base layer for the skin. Like I say, that's getting a bit too much, but again, you can use the strength for this and you can just decrease the amount that actually has once you've got something that looks okay. I'm going to keep that at 100% for the moment. I just wanted to show you just while I add in the rest of this detail. Okay, I'm going to do this quite quickly and I'm not going to be too particular about it because I'm only doing this really to just kind of give you an idea of how I worked. Okay, there you go. You can see that that's gone far too bumpy. And it's worked its way too much. So you can undo, and I might just need to remove that pressure a little bit and some of that build up so that it isn't quite so potent. That's a bit better. Also need to be a bit lighter perhaps with some of my brush strokes. Okay, cool. And that gives me another layer to kind of work with. And then what I'll do, I will create another layer, and this one I might call Scales. So there are a few different ways of applying textures that are really useful. Oops, didn't want to do that. And one of them is using the repeat texture. Now again, you can load up the presets and to do your repeats, but I find that the moment you do that, then it just takes you back to the pull thing, which is okay, I guess, if you want to be using that. Sometimes you may not want to, but for the moment I'll be okay, because there is a lizard skin here which I really do want to use. There is a reptile style skin which is quite a good one to be, you know, using for a lizard really, or reptile, depending on what a velociraptor actually is. And it is starting to come through, but I might need to just increase some brush strokes there, so I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to whack the pressure up and the build up a tad. There we go. So that's quite nice. Again, it might be a bit much for what we want, but we can control that in a second just by lowering our strength. So have I got my... No, I didn't use my symmetry, so once again you can add it in. But again, I can show you another interesting tool. So if I just continue with this for the moment, I'm just going to work on the head area for the moment. There you go. It's really overpowering, isn't it? That's a little bit too much. But what I quite like is when you can do this Sculpt Symmetry, you can also equalize. And if I press that, what it will do is it will look at one side and it will look at the other side, and it will create an equal sort of sculpt between the two. So it's instantly softened that down whilst adding it in to the other side. And I can still just lower that down a little bit if I want to, you know, because I don't want it to be too much in any way, shape or form. But what I wanted to do was go through some of the edging around sort of like the lips and the eye. So I'm going to lock that, and I'm just going to create a new layer again. I shall call that well, skin edge, I guess, really, isn't it? Not sin edge, skin edge. There we go. Right, now what I want to do is find a nice sort of scales texture. So if I just go to my content browser and do a search for scales, and then have a, oh, maybe it's just scale. There we go. That gives me a whole load of others which I can use. One of which particularly useful is this scale PSD. Now under the pull tool there, I'm going to use the stencil, and I'm just going to drag and drop that into there. And you can see we end up with this stencil basically over the top. But what that allows is that wherever I paint, that will sort of apply that texture to it. So spend some time with this, you know, sort of zoom in and maneuver your animal, creature, object, whatever it is that you want, to where you need it to be. Equally, okay, you can use some different functions. If you hold down the T button and the left mouse button, it will move. If you hold down the right, it will scale, and if you hold down the middle, it will rotate it. So I'm going to line up that little line there, and then I'm going to shrink my brush quite a lot. And you can see I've got the skin edge selected. So now if I just start painting that on, oh, I've got something else on in there as well. So I just need to make sure that I don't have a stamp on there. So I'm not going to use the stamp. I just want to make sure I'm only using the stencil. And there you go. You can see that that stencil comes out, and you can soften that out again if you want. And I can just edit and adjust my model and my stencil. So if I move that over a bit, and then I can rotate and zoom in, increasing the size of it. Sorry, I'm on a bit of a sensitive mouse here. There we go. And I will just finish that detail. And what you might want to do, pressing Q will get rid of that for you. You might just want to go over with your smoothing brush just to stop it from being quite so jaggedy, but it means that you get that wonderful sort of lizard edging that you would expect to find on a velociraptor. And once again, I've forgotten to do the symmetry, so I can, you know, sculpt my symmetry over to one side using that. And largely this is all I did in order to get my lizard in the other one. So if I just go back and show you my raptor there, which will take a second. you can see the layers that I have got, layers that I didn't use actually in the end and I got rid of, and you know, a couple of different things that I worked between to get from one to the other. Like if you see the difference between the claws that I had to start with, and then if I turn the claws on, you can see I worked into that mesh a little bit to get a little bit more of a realistic claw and nail working. And you layer stuff up and you try and you experiment with a few tools in order to get something that builds its way up. And so if I can, you know, I can deselect the claws. You can see that the leg scales as well, which was just layering these skin textures up over and over again, to be perfectly honest. So if I then turn the leg scales off and fine leg wrinkles, you know, you can see that it all starts to lose its detail. So we have like the big skin on layer 5, which is what I was using, and the edging skin around I did with the mouth and around the top of the nose and the cranium there. And you can see that the fine arm wrinkles and fine scales and stuff. So if I get rid of the fine arm wrinkles, that should all disappear. There you go. And you can see I've got fine wrinkles left in there, which may be an empty layer. If I do that, there you go. You can see that now just disappears, and that you're left with basically the skin that I started to work with, along with my, you know, edging and stuff that I did here. And it really is just a case of continuing to build up these layers, working in a way that works for you, using things as stencils as well to kind of work with what you've got and adding in the detail in order to get stuff really working to begin your sculpting sort of experience in BodyPaint 3D. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe or check out blog.maxon.co.uk.